The Empire had conquered 17 star systems in less than 100 years. Their warships filled the skies of countless worlds, and every species in the galaxy knew their name. When they arrived at a planet, they did not ask for surrender. They simply took what they wanted. No one had ever stopped them, and no one had ever tried. Admiral N stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Flame, watching the stars through the massive viewing window. He was tall even by standards, with gray skin that had turned darker over his many years of service. His eyes were the color of burning copper, and they had seen more death than most beings could imagine. He had led the conquest of 3 star systems himself, and his name was whispered with fear across the galaxy. Today he had received orders that puzzled him. A small planet had been discovered at the edge of an unremarkable solar system. The scouts reported that it was inhabited by a species called humans. They were young, having only recently developed the ability to travel between stars. Their technology was primitive compared to. They should have been nothing more than another easy conquest. But the High Command wanted them assessed first. Something about their signals had caught attention. Something about the way they spoke about themselves in their broadcasts. The humans called their planet Earth, and they seemed to believe it was special somehow. N found this amusing. Every species thought their world was special until the Empire arrived. His fleet emerged from hyperspace near the largest planet in the system, a massive ball of swirling gas that the humans called Jupiter. 20 warships hung in the darkness, their hulls gleaming with the power of engineering. Each one carried enough firepower to level a city. Together, they could crack the crust of a planet. "Admiral," his sensor officer called out, "we are detecting a transmission from the inner system. It appears to be directed at us." N raised one eyebrow. "Already, they spotted us quickly for primitives. What does it say?" The officer worked at his console for a moment. "It is being broadcast in 17 different languages, Admiral. They clearly want us to understand it." He paused, his copper eyes blinking. The message reads, "Do not approach Earth." Silence fell across the bridge. Officers exchanged glances. In all the years of expansion, no species had ever sent them a warning. Conquered peoples begged. They pleaded. They offered tribute and slaves and anything else they thought might save them, but they never warned. N began to laugh. It was a cold sound, harsh and ancient. "A warning," he said. "These creatures send a warning to the Empire. How delightful." He turned to his navigation officer. "Set course for the inner system. Take us to this Earth. I want to see what makes these humans so confident." The fleet moved inward, passing the ringed planet that humans called Saturn, then the red world they called Mars. As they traveled, more warnings came. The message repeated every hour in more languages than N knew existed. The humans were clearly determined to be understood. On Earth, deep inside a military complex that sat beneath the mountains of a continent called North America, Commander Lisa Grant watched the alien fleets approach on her display screens. She was 43 years old, with short brown hair and tired eyes that had seen too many sleepless nights. She had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, and now that it had arrived, she felt strangely calm. Park sat at the station beside her. He was younger, barely 30, with a quick mind and nervous hands that never stopped moving. He was one of the best analysts in the organization, and right now his face was pale with worry. "They're not stopping," said. "The fleet just passed Mars orbit. They're ignoring every warning we send." Lisa nodded slowly. She had expected this. Every simulation they had ever run ended the same way. When you warned an empire that had never been challenged, they did not listen. They could not listen. Their entire existence was built on the assumption that nothing could stop them. "We knew they wouldn't," she said quietly. "Nobody ever does." Turned to look at her. "So we're really doing this. We're really going to wake them." Lisa did not answer immediately. She thought about the decision she was about to make and what it would mean for humanity. For 50 years, since the discovery in Antarctica, the world's governments had kept the secret. They had studied what they found. They had learned what little they could, and they had prayed they would never have to use it. But prayers did not stop fleets. Prayers did not protect planets. Only power did that, and humanity had found a power that no one in the galaxy could imagine. She picked up a secure communication device and spoke two words that would change the course of galactic history. Wake them. Thousands of miles away, in a facility buried even deeper than Lisa's command center, Dr. Carol received the wake command. She was a small woman with gray hair and gentle hands, the kind of person who looked like she should be teaching children or tending a garden. Instead, she had spent 15 years studying something that made her wake up screaming at least once a month. The facility around her hummed with energy. Machines that humanity barely understood lined the walls, their lights blinking in patterns that seemed almost alive. At the center of it all stood a massive door, 20 meters tall and carved from a metal that did not exist on Earth. Carol took a deep breath and entered her authorization code. The door began to open, and cold air rushed out from the chamber beyond. She stepped through into darkness, and the lights came on automatically, revealing what lay inside. 7 figures stood in a circle, each one 30 meters tall. They looked almost human, but their proportions were wrong in ways that made the mind ache. Their surfaces were covered in geometric patterns that seemed to move when Carol tried to focus on them. They had been standing here for longer than humanity had existed, waiting for something. Perhaps waiting for this exact moment. Carol spoke the activation phrase, a sequence of sounds that had taken decades to decode. The patterns on the figures began to glow, softly at first, then brighter and brighter until she had to shield her eyes. A deep humming filled the chamber, resonating in her bones and her teeth and somewhere behind her thoughts. One by one, the Titans opened their eyes, and those eyes burned with a light that had no name in any human language, a light that had been old when the first stars were young. Above them, far above, the fleet continued its approach toward Earth. Admiral N stood on his bridge, confident in his power, certain of his victory. He had conquered 3 star systems. He had broken a dozen species beneath his heel. He did not know what was waking beneath the mountains of that small blue planet. He did not know that humanity had found something ancient and terrible and beyond all understanding. He did not know that his empire had just made the worst mistake in its history. He would learn soon enough. The Titans had been sleeping beneath the ice of Antarctica for longer than humanity could measure. The expedition that found them in 1973 had been searching for something else entirely. A team of geologists drilling through ancient ice sheets had discovered a chamber that should not have existed, carved from stone that did not match anything on Earth. Inside that chamber they found the first Titan, standing silent and still, its eyes closed, its surface covered in patterns that seemed to whisper when the scientists came close. The governments of the world had united in a way they never had before to keep the discovery secret. More expeditions followed. More chambers were found, scattered across the planet in places no one had ever thought to look. 7 Titans in total, each one identical, each one waiting. It took 30 years to understand even a fraction of what they were. The patterns on their surfaces contained information, instructions written in a language that predated every known civilization. Humanity's greatest minds worked together in secret, decoding what they could, piecing together a story that stretched back billions of years. The Titans were not weapons. They were guardians. They had been created by a civilization so ancient that even their ruins had turned to dust long before Earth's sun had formed. These ancient ones had spread across galaxies, had reshaped reality itself according to their will. And then something had come for them, something from beyond the edges of known space, something that fed on thought and grew stronger with every mind it consumed. The ancient ones had fought back with all their terrible power. They had failed. In their final days, as their civilization crumbled around them, they had created the Titans. Not to save themselves, for they were already dying, but to protect the worlds where conscious life might one day evolve, to guard the young species that would come after them. And then they had placed the Titans on those worlds and let themselves fade into nothing. Dr. Carroll knew this history better than anyone alive. She had devoted her life to studying the Titans, to understanding what they were and what they could do. Now she stood in the primary chamber, watching the 7 figures come to life, and she felt small in a way that had nothing to do with their size. The Titan directly in front of her turned its head, and those burning eyes looked down at her. There was intelligence in that gaze, vast and old and utterly alien. Carol had communicated with them before, in the limited way that humans could communicate with beings that thought on timescales of. She knew they were aware. She knew they understood. "Guardians," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "A threat approaches Earth, a fleet of warships from a conquering empire. They ignored our warnings. They mean to harm us." The Titan did not respond in words. It never did. Instead, Carol felt something press against her mind, gentle but overwhelming, like standing beneath a waterfall of pure thought. Images flashed through her consciousness. The fleet, the approaching ships, the intent behind them. And then the Titans moved. They did not walk or run or fly. They simply were in one place, and then they were in another. The ceiling of the chamber dissolved as they rose, matter parting around them like water around a stone. They passed through miles of rock and ice and atmosphere in an instant, and then they were in space, 7 pillars of light streaking toward the stars. Admiral N was reviewing tactical data when his sensor officer screamed. It was not a sound the Admiral had ever heard from one of his crew before. Officers did not scream. They were trained from birth to face death with cold dignity. "Admiral," the officer gasped, his copper eyes wide with something that looked like religious terror. 7 objects approaching from the planet's surface. Speed is. The instruments cannot calculate. They are moving faster than anything we have ever recorded." N turned to the main display screen. He saw them then, 7 shapes burning across the darkness of space, leaving trails of light that seemed to twist reality itself. They moved through the void as if gravity and distance meant nothing to them. They were coming straight for his fleet. "All ships," he ordered, keeping his voice calm through sheer force of will. "Defensive formation. Open fire when targets are in range." The fleet was the most powerful military force in 17 star systems. 20 warships, each one bristling with weapons that could shatter mountains. They had conquered worlds. They had burned cities. They had broken every enemy they had ever faced. Their weapons did nothing. Energy beams struck the approaching Titans and simply vanished, absorbed into those shifting patterns without effect. Kinetic rounds accelerated to impossible speeds turned to dust before they could make contact. The Titans did not slow. They did not falter. They moved through the storm of fire as if it were nothing more than rain. One of the Titans reached the outer ships first. It was vaguely human in shape, 30 meters of ancient metal and burning light. It raised one hand and the warship in front of it simply stopped. Not destroyed, not damaged, just frozen, every system dead, every light dark. Another Titan touched a cruiser with a single finger, and the hull began to change. Metal became crystal, spreading across the surface in patterns of impossible beauty. The weapons went dark. The engines fell silent. Within seconds, the ship was transformed into something that looked like a sculpture carved from frozen lightning. N watched his fleet die around him. Not die, he realized. That was the wrong word. His ships were being changed, transformed, made into something else. The Titans were not destroying his forces. They were removing them from the universe as he understood it. "Weapons are having no effect," his tactical officer reported, his voice shaking. "Shields are useless. Admiral, what do we do?" N had no answer. In all his years of conquest, he had never faced an enemy he could not hurt. He had never imagined such an enemy could exist. The largest Titan approached the eternal flame. It was different from the others, its patterns more complex, its light more intense. It moved slowly now, almost gently, and it stopped just meters from the bridge viewport. N found himself looking into eyes that burned with the light of creation itself. A voice filled the bridge. It did not come from speakers or communicators. It came from everywhere at once, from the walls and the air and the thoughts of every being on board. It spoke in perfect, but beneath the words there was something older, something that made N's ancient blood run cold. "You were warned," the voice said. "One warning is all anyone ever receives. You chose not to listen. Now you will be returned to your empire and you will carry a message." The Titan reached out with one massive hand. Its fingers touched the hull of the eternal flame, and N felt his ship begin to change around him. The transformation was gentle, almost tender. Systems shut down one by one. The lights dimmed. The artificial gravity faded. "Tell your emperor," the voice continued. "Tell him that Earth is protected. Tell him that there are guardians in this universe older than his stars. Tell him that if he sends another fleet, there will not be survivors to carry warnings." The darkness took in then, soft as a mother's embrace, and he knew nothing more. 6 hours later, the Sixth Fleet drifted in the space beyond Mars. 20 ships, each one transformed into a monument of crystal and strange metal, beautiful and utterly dead. The crews were found alive, unconscious, floating in emergency pods that the Titans had somehow deployed before the transformation was complete. Not one had died, but none of them would ever forget what they had seen. On Earth, Carol watched the Titans return to their chamber beneath the mountains. They moved back to their positions, folded their hands, closed their eyes. The light faded from their surfaces. They became statues again, ancient and silent and waiting. She wondered if they would sleep for another 1,000,000 years, or if this was just the beginning. Deep in her heart, she was afraid to know the answer. The message reached the 3 days after the battle. It traveled through hyperspace relays that connected the 17 systems of the Empire, passing from station to station until it arrived at the Imperial Palace on Prime. The officials who received it did not believe what they were seeing. They checked the transmission codes 5 times before finally accepting that it was genuine. Admiral N, conqueror of 3 star systems, one of the most feared military commanders in the galaxy, had been defeated. His entire fleet had been disabled without a single casualty. 20 warships, the pride of the Sixth Fleet, now drifted as crystalline monuments in the space around an unremarkable blue planet. The recordings that accompanied the message showed things that made even hardened military officers turn pale. 7 beings that moved through space as if reality itself parted for them. Weapons that did nothing. Ships transformed into something beyond understanding, and a voice that spoke with the weight of eternity behind it. Emperor N, the Undying, received the news in his private chambers. He was old even by standards, his gray skin turned almost black with age, his copper eyes dimmed by centuries of rule. He had sat on the throne for 400 years, watching his empire grow from a single system to the greatest power in the known galaxy. He had never known defeat. He watched the recordings in silence. He watched them again, and then a third time, studying every detail, searching for weakness, for deception, for anything that might explain what he was seeing. When he was finished, he called his advisors to the throne room. They came quickly, as they always did when the Emperor summoned. General, a commander of all Imperial military forces, a woman whose reputation for brutality was matched only by her tactical brilliance. High Priest N, leader of the state religion, whose words could move billions. Ministera, who managed the vast bureaucracy that kept the empire running. And a dozen others, each one powerful in their own right, each one trembling slightly in the presence of the throne. "You have all seen the recordings," the Emperor said. His voice was soft, but it carried through the massive chamber like thunder. "I want explanations." General stepped forward. My Emperor, the recordings appear to be genuine. We have analyzed the energy signatures of these beings. They do not match anything in our databases. Whatever they are not a species we have encountered before. They called themselves guardians, the high priest added. There are legends, ancient stories from civilizations that existed before the people rose to power. Stories of beings created to protect young worlds from threats beyond the stars. I always believed they were myths. Myths do not disable fleets, the Emperor said coldly. What do you recommend? The advisors exchanged glances. None of them wanted to speak first. Finally, Ministra cleared her throat. Perhaps, my Emperor, diplomacy would be the course. These humans clearly possess power beyond our understanding. If we could negotiate, establish peaceful relations. Negotiate? The Emperor's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. The Empire does not negotiate, we conquer. We have built everything we are on that principle. If we show weakness now, every subjugated world will see it. Every species we have crushed beneath our heel will begin to hope. The rebellions would tear the Empire apart. General nodded. The Emperor speaks truth. We cannot be seen to retreat. Our entire structure depends on the belief that we cannot be stopped. Then what do you suggest? Ministra asked. The general's copper eyes gleamed. We send everything, the Grand Armada, every ship we can spare from the core systems, 12,000 warships. If these beings have limits, we will find them, and if they do not, she paused, then at least we will die as. The Emperor considered this. He thought about his empire, about the hundreds of billions who lived under his rule. He thought about his legacy, about the historians who would write of his reign in centuries to come. And he thought about those 7 burning figures that had unmade his fleet without effort. Assemble the Grand Armada, he said finally. We will show these humans and their guardians what the Empire truly is. On Earth, Lisa Grant received intelligence about the Imperial buildup within a week. The United Earth Defense Council had been monitoring communications since the first contact, using technology reverse-engineered from the Titan's chamber. What they learned made Lisa's blood run cold. 12,000 warships, more firepower than humanity had ever imagined. Every sensor, every analysis, every simulation said the same thing. This was not a fleet meant to probe or test. This was a fleet meant to overwhelm through sheer numbers, to bury any defense under an endless wave of destruction. She called an emergency meeting in the underground command center. Carol attended via secure video link from the Titan facility. Park was there in person, his face drawn with worry. Can the Titans handle that many ships? Lisa asked directly. Carol hesitated before answering. We don't know their limits. The ancient records suggest they were designed to protect against threats we can't even imagine, but they're not infinite. Nothing is infinite. Against a fleet that size, all attacking at once, she shook her head. I genuinely do not know. Spoke up. There might be another way. I've been going through the decoded records from the Titan's chamber. There's more information there, things we never fully understood because we didn't need to. What kind of information? Lisa asked. History, said. The history of the civilization that created the Titans, why they made them, what they were protecting against, and what happens if the Titans are pushed too far. Carol's face went pale. That information is classified beyond anything we've ever. I know, he interrupted, but if we share it if we show them what the Titans actually are, what they can become. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Maybe they'll understand. Maybe they'll choose not to fight. Lisa looked between them. You're suggesting we try to scare them into peace. I'm suggesting we tell them the truth, said. The whole truth. About the Titans, about the Ancient Ones, about the threat they were created to fight. Let them make an informed decision. Carol was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I've seen what's in those records. The later ones, the ones we could only partially decode. They show what happened when the Ancient Ones pushed the Titans to their full potential. It's not something anyone should have to see. But if it prevents a war, pressed. Lisa made her decision. Prepare a complete data package. Everything we know about the Titans and their creators. We'll transmit it to the Imperial flagship as soon as their fleet enters the solar system. She paused, and pray that the Emperor is wiser than he appears. The Grand Armada launched 3 weeks later. 12,000 warships, carrying millions of soldiers, representing the full might of the Empire. They moved through hyperspace in waves, each jump bringing them closer to Earth. Emperor N traveled with them aboard his personal flagship, the Undying Glory. He had not led a military campaign in over a century, but this was different. This was not mere conquest. This was a statement, a demonstration of power that would echo through the galaxy for generations. As his fleet prepared for the final jump to the human system, he stared out at the stars and allowed himself a small smile. Whatever these guardians were, they would learn that nothing could stand against the will of. He did not know that the humans were waiting with something more powerful than weapons. He did not know that the truth itself was about to change everything. The Grand Armada emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the human solar system. 12,000 warships spread across the darkness like a swarm of angry stars. Each one bristled with weapons. Each one carried soldiers ready to die for the glory of. Together, they represented more firepower than any civilization in the galaxy had ever assembled in one place. Emperor N stood on the bridge of the Undying Glory, watching his fleet take formation around him. This was the moment he had waited for. The moment when the universe would learn that nothing, not even ancient guardians, could defy the will of his empire. "All ships report ready, my Emperor," General announced. She stood at his right side, her copper eyes fixed on the tactical displays. "We can begin our approach on your command." The Emperor opened his mouth to give the order. Before he could speak, his communications officer interrupted. "My Emperor, we are receiving a transmission from Earth. It is directed specifically at your flagship." "A plea for mercy?" the Emperor asked, amused. "Let us hear what the humans have to say before we crush them." The transmission began, but it was not a plea. It was not a warning. It was something far stranger. Images filled the main display screen, not images of Earth or its defenses. Images of something else entirely. A civilization older than the stars themselves, spreading across galaxies like light spreading through darkness. Cities that floated between dimensions. Ships that moved through time as easily as through space. Beings whose thoughts could reshape reality. The Ancient Ones, the creators of the Titans. The Emperor watched in spite of himself. He saw their rise, their golden age, their unimaginable achievements, and then he saw what came for them. It had no name that any species could pronounce. It existed outside normal space, in the gaps between dimensions. It fed on conscious thought, on awareness, on the spark that made beings more than mere matter, and it was hungry. The Ancient Ones had fought back. They had turned their reality-shaping powers against the darkness that consumed them. They had built weapons that could crack planets and tear holes in the fabric of existence itself. Nothing worked. The thing from beyond only grew stronger with each attack, feeding on the energy directed against it. In their desperation, the Ancient Ones had created the Titans, not as weapons, but as shields. Guardians designed to protect the worlds where conscious life might one day evolve. The Titans were built to disable threats without destroying them, to preserve life wherever possible, to stand between the innocent and the darkness. But the records showed something else, something that made the Emperor's ancient blood turn cold. They showed what happened when the Titans were pushed beyond their limits, when the threats they faced left no option but complete response. The images were fragmentary, corrupted by time, but what they revealed was enough. The Titans in full combat mode did not simply disable their enemies. They erased them, not destroyed, not killed, erased from existence itself. Ships, fleets, entire systems simply ceased to be. Not even debris remained, not even memory. The Ancient Ones had watched in horror as their own creations demonstrated power beyond anything they had imagined. The final image in the transmission was a warning written in the mathematical language of the universe itself. It said, "The Guardians are merciful. They will preserve life when they can. They will disable rather than destroy. But if the threat they face refuses all mercy, if their protected worlds are endangered beyond tolerance, they will respond with final force. And nothing in any universe will survive that response." Silence filled the bridge of the undying glory. The Emperor stared at the screen where the images had played, his ancient mind struggling to process what he had seen. "My Emperor," General A's voice was uncertain. In all her years of service, she had never heard herself sound uncertain. "What are your orders?" The Emperor did not answer immediately. He thought about his empire, about the 17 systems that looked to him for guidance. He thought about his legacy, about the stories that would be told of his reign. He thought about power and pride and the weight of history. And he thought about those final images, the ships that simply stopped existing, the stars that went dark without explosion or warning, the void that remained where civilizations had stood. He had conquered 3 systems himself back when he was young. He had watched worlds burn. He had seen billions kneel before him. He had believed himself invincible. Looking at the evidence of what the Titans could truly do, he felt small for the first time in 400 years. On Earth, Lisa Grant and her team watched the fleet through long-range sensors. They had transmitted the data package hours ago. Now they waited, barely breathing, wondering if the truth would be enough. "The fleet has stopped," Park reported, his voice tight with tension. "They're holding position at the edge of the system." Carol appeared on the main screen, her face pale but hopeful. "The Titans are aware. They're ready to respond if the fleet moves closer, but they're waiting." "Everyone is waiting," Lisa said softly. "The whole galaxy is holding its breath." Minutes passed, then hours. The Grand Armada hung motionless in the darkness, 12,000 warships frozen in formation. On the bridge of the undying glory, Emperor N sat on his command throne, staring at nothing. His advisors waited for orders. His officers waited for commands. His entire empire waited for him to speak. Finally, he did. "Contact the humans," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual authority. Tell them we wish to talk." General A stepped forward, her face twisted with disbelief. "My Emperor, we cannot simply." "Do you wish to test those things?" the Emperor interrupted, gesturing at the screen where the images had played. "Do you wish to discover if the recordings speak truth? Do you wish to be erased from existence, General, to become nothing, not even a memory?" The general had no answer. "I have conquered systems," the Emperor continued. "I have broken species beneath my heel. I have built an empire that will last 1,000 years, but I am not fool enough to challenge the guardians of the universe itself." He closed his eyes. "We have been proud. We have been powerful. Perhaps it is time we learn to be wise." The transmission went out. Earth received it within minutes. And for the first time in the history of the Empire, an emperor asked for peace. In the chamber beneath the mountains, the Titans stood silent and still. Their eyes were open now, watching, waiting. Carol looked up at them, wondering what they thought of all this, wondering if beings that old could still feel hope. One of the Titans turned its head slightly. Its burning eyes met hers for just a moment. And Carol could have sworn she saw something like approval in that ancient gaze. The negotiations lasted 3 weeks. They took place on a space station that humanity had constructed in orbit around Earth's moon, a neutral ground where both species could meet without feeling threatened. The delegation arrived in a single diplomatic vessel, unarmed and flying under a flag of peace that their empire had never used before. Emperor N did not attend personally. He sent his most trusted diplomat instead, a female named N who had spent 200 years resolving conflicts between the subjugated worlds of the Empire. She was skilled at finding common ground, at turning enemies into allies. She had never imagined she would be using those skills to negotiate with a species that had humbled the greatest military force in the galaxy. Lisa Grant led the human delegation. She brought Park as her technical advisor and Carol to answer questions about the Titans. They met in a conference room with windows that looked out over the blue and white curve of Earth below. The first meeting was tense. Centuries of superiority did not disappear overnight. N struggled to speak to the humans as equals rather than as future subjects. Lisa struggled to trust beings whose empire had crushed so many others. But slowly, day by day, understanding began to grow. N shared the history of the people, how they had risen from a harsh world where survival required strength and unity, how their early expansion had been driven not by greed but by fear, a desperate need to ensure that no one could ever threaten them again, how conquest had become habit, then tradition, then the very definition of what it meant to be. Lisa shared humanity's story in return, the wars that had nearly destroyed them, the moment when nations that had been enemies for generations came together to study the Titans, the decades of preparation, knowing that someday the stars would bring threats they could not face alone. "We are not so different," N said one evening, as they watched Earth rotate slowly below. "Both our peoples were shaped by fear. Both of us reached for power because we were afraid of being weak." "The difference," Lisa replied, "is what we did with that power. You used yours to conquer, we used ours to protect." "Perhaps," N's copper eyes were thoughtful, "or perhaps you simply found better guardians than we did." The negotiations produced a treaty unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Empire agreed to halt all expansion. They would not release their subject worlds immediately. That would cause chaos beyond imagining, but they would begin a process of gradual autonomy. Within a century, every species under rule would have the chance to choose their own path. In exchange, humanity agreed to share the knowledge they had gained from the Titans. Not the Titans themselves, for they were not humanity's to give, but the historical records, the warnings, the truth about what existed in the darkness beyond the galaxy's edge. "There are threats out there," Carol explained to the assembled delegates. "Things that make your empire look like children playing with toys. The Ancient Ones knew this. That's why they created the Titans, not to stop conquests or settle disputes between species, to protect conscious life itself from extinction." Emperor N addressed the final session via holographic transmission from his throne room on Prime. He looked older than he had before, his copper eyes dimmed by something more than age. Wisdom, perhaps, or humility, or simply the weight of understanding how small his empire truly was. "For 400 years," he said, "I believed that power was the only thing that mattered. I believed that the strong had the right to rule the weak. I believed that the empire would last forever." He paused. "I was wrong." He looked directly at the camera, knowing that his words would be heard across all 17 systems of his empire. "We encountered something we could not conquer, something that showed us the truth about our place in the universe. We are not the masters of creation. We are not the pinnacle of existence. We are young. We are small. And there are things in the darkness that could snuff us out like candles in a storm. But we are not alone," he continued. "The humans have offered us knowledge. They have offered us alliance. They have offered us a chance to be something more than conquerors. I intend to accept that offer, not because I am afraid, though I am, but because I finally understand that strength without wisdom is meaningless, that power without purpose is empty, that conquest is not the only way to matter." The transmission ended. In the conference room on the lunar station, there was silence. Then N extended her hand toward Lisa in the human gesture of agreement that she had learned during their negotiations. Lisa took it. Their grips were firm. their eyes meeting with something that might, in time, become trust. The galaxy had changed, not through war or conquest, but through a simple truth that no species could ignore. 6 months later, Lisa Grant stood in the chamber beneath the mountains, looking up at the Titans. They had returned to their sleeping positions after the negotiations ended, their eyes closed, their surfaces still. Carol stood beside her, along with Park and a dozen other officials who had been part of the events that reshaped galactic politics. "Do you think they understand what happened?" asked. "The Titans, I mean. Do they know what they accomplished?" Carol considered the question. "They've been protecting worlds for billions of years, longer than any species in the galaxy has existed. I think they understand better than we ever could." Lisa stepped closer to the nearest Titan, close enough to see the geometric patterns that covered its surface. They seemed to pulse gently, like a heartbeat measured in centuries. "We gave the one warning," she said softly. "Just one. That's all anyone ever gets. They didn't listen the first time." "But they listened eventually," Carol replied. "That's what matters." Lisa nodded slowly. "The Ancient Ones created these things to protect conscious life. Not just humans, not just everyone, every species that might someday reach for the stars." She reached out, almost touching the Titan's surface before pulling her hand back. "Maybe that's the lesson. We're all in this together, all of us, across the whole galaxy, facing the same darkness, hopping for the same light." Above them, through miles of rock and ice and sky, the stars shone down on a universe that was slowly learning a new way to exist. The Empire, once the terror of 17 systems, was beginning its long journey toward something better. Earth, once an unremarkable blue world at the edge of an average solar system, had become the center of a new kind of alliance. And beneath the mountains, the Titans slept. They had done what they were created to do. They had protected. They had preserved. They had given conscious beings the chance to learn from their mistakes rather than being destroyed by them. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, the thing that had consumed the Ancient Ones still waited, still hungry, still watching. But now, for the first time in billions of years, something waited to meet it. An alliance of species that had learned to stand together. Guardians that would not rest while life still burned in the universe. And a small blue world that had once sent a single warning to an empire. "Do not approach Earth." They had listened in the end. And perhaps because of that, the galaxy would survive what was coming. Perhaps. The Titans dreamed their ancient dreams. The stars turned in their eternal dance. And humanity, small and young and full of impossible hope, looked up at the sky and wondered what would come next. Whatever it was, they would face it together. That was the only way any of them would survive.